What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, this is one of our biggest videos throughout the entire offseason. We're going to be talking about the top 5 best picks in the draft. When determining which picks we feel are the best, these are the guys that we really get behind. We feel really confident in their picks, their safety, their upside, and overall, they do have to come in at a value on draft day. And the 5 players that we're going to list in this video, they do check all of those boxes. Now, this isn't going to be the first time you've heard of any of these players. In fact, we've spoken many times about these players throughout the offseason, but that makes sense. We're talking about players that we're really high on. It would be weird if we just pulled 5 new player names out and said that these are the best players. No, these are guys that we've been supporting for most, if not the entire offseason. Before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was Eagles tight ends had 234 targets in 2019. So looking back at all teams in all seasons since the year 2000, where would that come down in the all-time ranking? The correct answer was actually second. Clearly, the Eagles used the tight end position not only more than any team in the league, but more than any team in recent history. Congratulations to Connor McLeod, you got this one right. As for today's stat of the day, which quarterback leads the league in rushing touchdowns since 2016? If you know that answer, leave it in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Also, guys, with drafts quickly approaching, consider signing up for our draft package. You'll have access to our tier-based rankings, player breakdowns on all draftable players, sleepers, targets, busts, risk ratings, consistency charts, and more. So if that interests you, go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com, link as always in the description box below. With all that out of the way though, let's hop right into the video, and I'm going to start as usual with the player in the thumbnail. No secrets here, it's Jalen Reagor of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, Jason Moore of the Footballers was asking who is your my guy this year, and I never really sat down and planted a my guy every season. I do have a handful of picks that I like the best, but when really trying to hone it down to one player, I just think the value of Jalen Reagor makes him one of the best picks in the entire draft, so he is definitely going to be my guy for 2020. For starters, this is a player coming off the board as the wide receiver 54, which means no matter which draft you're in, what league, what scoring format, you're going to have an opportunity to draft him on your team. Oftentimes, there are some players, and even some of the early round players that I'm listing in this video, you may not even have the option to draft them. So your draft position 1 through 12 may fall at a certain stage of the draft where even having that player as an option, it may not be available to you. Well, Jalen Reagor, if you really want to make sure he's on your team, you can definitely draft him still late, but reach on him a few spots and make sure to land him, so long as you don't put yourself in a bidding war with other players in your league. All you have to do really is just look at the other wide receivers being drafted around him, and you can easily see why he is just being extremely undervalued when it comes to ADP. He's going behind players like Preston Williams, Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel, and even Justin Jefferson. Don't get me wrong, I like the potential opportunity of Justin Jefferson this year, playing alongside Adam Thielen in the vacated Stephon Diggs role, but there have been reports coming out that there's a chance he may not even be the second wide receiver on this team. For a team that's going to be running a lot of 2 tight end sets, there is going to be plenty of situations where the third wide receiver may not even see as many snaps just due to the offensive formations, and that could impact the player in that third wide receiver position. That's going to be Justin Jefferson. Jalen Reagor is already going to be stepping in and being presumably the leading receiver on this team. Robbie Anderson, he has been productive in years past playing in the New York Jets offense, but he's a free agent receiver changing teams. The quarterback is Teddy Bridgewater. He's easily going to be playing behind DJ Moore. A ton of the targets coming out of this offense are going to be going to Christian McCaffrey. So yet again, we see so many players that are being overvalued, yet Jalen Reagor seems to be continuously undervalued. He's even being drafted over 10 spots, not 10 overall spots, 10 spots in the wide receiver rankings behind Emmanuel Sanders. So just to touch on some news since the last time we broke down Jalen Reagor, we have a couple of things that have developed from camp. The first being Miles Sanders week to week with an injury. We haven't dropped Miles Sanders dramatically in the rankings for this. He is set to be ready for the start of the season, which is all we can really ask for. But since we never really knew if he could handle a workhorse type of role when it comes to the amount of touches he can produce and still remain healthy for an entire season, Miles Sanders hadn't proven that to us yet, and for him to already be dealing with an injury in training camp, it is a bit of a red flag. So how is that important for Jalen Reagor? Well, imagine Miles Sanders does go down with an injury. They're going to heavily rely on the other playmakers. I could see a boost to the tight ends, Goddard and Ertz, but this is also going to positively impact the potential targets that are overall going to Jalen Reagor as well. This team has already cemented themselves as top 5 when it comes to overall plays per game offensively, and to eliminate some of those targets that were projected to be going to the backfield, all the other receivers on this team, they're going to soak up more targets themselves. I know if Miles Sanders was to go down with an injury, Boston Scott is a very capable pass catching running back as well, but he is also injured too. Corey Clement is the number 1 running back taking snaps with the first team offense, so I just can't see a way where if Corey Clement is the starter, they're giving the same amount of targets that they were projected to the backfield, so that just increases the potential upside in the ceiling of Reagor, and we're already starting to see those things become a possibility. The other receivers on this team, Djax, he hasn't been healthy or been able to stay healthy for several seasons. His last 16 game season was in 2013, and Alshon Jeffrey, the highest paid receiver on this team, he's likely to start the year on the pup. The second bit of news is so far in training camp, Jalen Reagor has been shining. He has not dropped a ball yet. You can already look up some footage of some plays that he's making, and he looks damn good. So he's out there making plays. Most of the other weapons that are likely to compete for touches and targets from him, they're just not available right now. And as much as I like Jalen Reagor before all of this news, I just like him that much more now. The next player we have is James Conner of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and originally I wasn't going to include him on this list, but after going through the ESPN ADP and seeing exactly how low he was being ranked and drafted, I felt the obligation to include him on this list because he was already a player that I liked. Right now he's coming off the board as the RB21, 1 spot ahead of Devin Singletary, behind David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, Leonard Fournette, a lot of running backs that are really lacking the overall upside that I'm typically looking for. James Conner, though, he does have that potential upside. For starters, he's been a top 5 running back in the league dating back to 2018, his first year stepping into a full workload. The dude was averaging 19.4 half PPR points per game, over 17 in standard, and over 21 points per game in full PPR. That was a 13 game sample. He was easily a top 5 running back through that span, and if he were able to play in all 16 games, this is what his end of year stat line would have looked like. Over 1,800 yards from scrimmage, including 68 receptions and 16 total touchdowns. Those types of numbers, very few running backs in the league ever compile in their entire careers. James Conner, we know he's able to produce that, and he's produced it in the same offense. This isn't a free agent running back like David Johnson or Le'Veon Bell, who have done it on other teams before, but are way past their prime. James Conner, he's still on his rookie contract. He's heading into his 4th year in the NFL, and while we do see him as a player with tread on his tires just due to his injury history, he's played in 10 or more games in every season of his career. Even if we take his career low in games played, which is 10 games in a season, which we saw in 2019, I'll take 10 games of a guy who I know I'm going to lock in and will quite possibly produce RB1 numbers for me, and I'm drafting him as a back-end RB2. I'll take that all day because I know in those 10 games, I'm going to lock him in. In games that he's injured, I'm not questioning on if I should start him or if a better start's going to be a player on my bench. I won't have those questions. I know start him when he's healthy, bench him when he's out, and I can find a replacement for those players throughout this season. Once I'm finished my draft, we know the potential of a lot of players on our teams, but it takes a few weeks for these players to find themselves, establish themselves in that offense. Well, James Conner, he's going to be healthy to start the season. I can auto lock him in while I see all of the other players start to develop, and if those injuries do start to occur, by that time I should have a good understanding of who my performers are. Some updates since the last time we broke down James Conner is that he really doesn't care about his doubters as long as, quote unquote, the people making the decisions on the team know what they're getting in him. And I actually like that response because it's a sign, it's an indicator that yeah, he has his doubters. That's why he's going as the RB21 in fantasy, but the coaching staff, the guys that make the decisions on which player is going to be starting at the running back position, he's basically saying they have faith in him, and why shouldn't they? The depth behind him, it's not really all that great. You have Benny Snell, Jalen Samuels. Neither one of those running backs is better than James Conner, let's face it. And Anthony McFarland, while a talented prospect, he's 5'8", 208 pounds. He's definitely better suited to be more of a change of pace back than any real threat to be a workhorse type rusher for this offense. And if your reasoning overall is to not draft James Conner because of a 4th round running back, the 18th pick in the 4th round is going to come in and potentially take over as the starter. If you're not drafting guys who have proven to be top 5 rushers at their position in the past on the same offense because of a 4th round draft pick, you should probably reassess your evaluation process because you're definitely drafting too scared. Up next, we have another wide receiver. It's Darius Slayton of the New York Giants. There are some players that I've been really high on throughout the offseason that when going to ESPN and looking at their ADP, ESPN may have them ranked several spots higher than they are on the other platforms. Well, Darius Slayton, he's one of those players that I've been high on throughout the entire offseason that's actually ranked much lower than he is on other platforms. He's coming in on ESPN ADP as the wide receiver 50. That's phenomenal value there. 4 spots above Jalen Reagor. He's being drafted several spots behind Golden Tate, 10 spots behind Sterling Shepard. But when looking at the New York Giants offense as a whole, especially their receiving weapons, Darius Slayton has the most upside out of any of those receivers. We're not drafting players in the later rounds who have safer floors. No, we're targeting players with the most upside. Darius Slayton has that. We saw explosive week-winning upside from him in 2019. He had a game in which he had 10 receptions, over 120 yards, a multi-touchdown score, and this was all in one game. Those are the types of players that can put together week-winning type production for you, and Darius Slayton, that's definitely something he brings to the table. One thing I didn't mention the last time that I broke Darius Slayton down, it's that you can probably actually get him cheaper after the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. I think he has the potential to be a drop candidate, or even somebody that you may be able to buy low on, even when compared to where people were taking him in drafts, because their opening schedule, it's a bit tough. Daniel Jones is pretty much undraftable for us for that same reason, but if you just look at it, 4 of their first 5 games are extremely tough, with Pittsburgh, Chicago, San Francisco in their first 3. They do get the Los Angeles Rams in week 4, but then follow that up with the Dallas Cowboys on the road. Not ideal, especially from a passing perspective. It's going to be tough for Darius Slayton to perform his best in those matchups, so I wouldn't be drafting him with the expectation to start. But the good thing is, coming off the board as the wide receiver 50, you won't be forced to. He's basically a free player, somebody you could draft with one of your last picks. But if your league mates are smart, even though the ADP has him ranked as the wide receiver 50, and that's where he will be showing up on the draft board when everybody's doing their online draft, smarter leagues, more experienced leagues, they would never let him fall to that area. I do feel very confident Darius Slayton is going to get immediate opportunity in this offense. He'll probably compete for the highest snap percentage out of any of the wide receivers, just based on being the only true outside threat. Last season, he only played 4.5% of the snaps from the slot. Compare that to Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate, 2 primarily slot receivers. Heading into last season, we always questioned, what are they going to do? Are they going to bounce Sterling Shepard outside? Is Evan Engram going to play as the primary outside receiver? We really weren't sure exactly what this offense was going to do, and now we figured it out. They have that high upside outside receiving threat. Darius Slayton, over 95% of snaps from the outside, so he's the only one I could see out of any New York Giants receiver that's not going to have somebody directly eating into his snaps and the percentage that he's overall seeing field time. Jumping back to running back, and we're going to move over to David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears. This is a player who I have brought up on several videos throughout this offseason, and the main reason for it is because his ADP, his ranking, the overall community's evaluation on David Montgomery has a lot of recency bias baked into it. Heading into last season's draft, David Montgomery, he really jumped up the draft boards. He was being drafted in the 3rd, the 4th round, and he was a player a lot of people, including myself, were targeting him. Now, I guess I got lucky to not be able to land him on any of my teams, but even if I did, I wouldn't be taking too much of what I saw from him in 2019 and labeling him as a bust and stamping his whole career as going to be an overall disappointment. We've seen in years past several running backs start out very slow. What you need to focus on more is the overall volume going to that player. Melvin Gordon could not have been a better example of this. In his rookie season 2015, he rushed for 3.5 yards per carry, still had over 200 overall touches, put up just over 800 yards from scrimmage, and was unable to convert on any of his rushing touchdown attempts. His overall fantasy points per game in half PPR was an abysmal 6.6, but for that reason, he fell to about the 8th or 9th round the following year in the 2016 draft for fantasy. In that season, I literally drafted every share I possibly could, and he bounced back. He had his 2nd most productive fantasy season of his entire career, averaging 17.7 fantasy points per game. He was on pace for over 15 touchdowns, posted over 1,400 yards from scrimmage, and his efficiency, it didn't even go up all that much. He went from 3.5 yards per carry to 3.9. His overall volume did increase, but again, not by anything dramatic, and that's the type of variance that you're going to get when you're talking about players who are getting the workload, but not converting in certain areas. Melvin Gordon, 0 touchdowns in 2015. The following season, averaging nearly 1 touchdown per game. We have to look at the positives with David Montgomery. Montgomery. He ranked 13th in carries in 2019. He has virtually no competition for touches behind him, especially when we're talking red zone touches. He ranks second in the entire league in the percentage of ownership over those carries inside the 5-yard line in 2019, coming in at a massive 87.5%, and that's something we know is going to translate to 2020. Tarik Cohen, he's a smaller scat back. He's not going to be taking over that area of the field. And speaking of Tarik Cohen, he was terrible in the passing game, so much so it was a legendary type failure. One of the worst receiving running back seasons we have ever seen in history. So if that doesn't open up the possibility for a potential David Montgomery expansion in the receiving game, then I don't know what will. So there are a lot of positive signs pointing to potential regression to what would be the mean for a player with that type of workload. And this offense could also see improvements as well. They have two shots at quarterback between Mitchell Trubisky and Nick Foles. Whether you're not high on one or the other, even if the one that you like the best ends up failing, they still have another shot to potentially improve upon what they had in 2019 at that position. And Anthony Miller was banged up all last year. Presumably heading into this season, he should be his healthiest, and we've seen the type of upside he can have and what he brings to this offense as well. Going back to David Montgomery's ADP though, on ESPN, it is completely bonkers. He's the running back 27. There is not one single other running back that is a true workhorse that is being drafted behind him. You could potentially make the argument for Ronald Jones, but that's not a guarantee. With David Montgomery, it is a guarantee. He's highly motivated. All signs, all reports coming out of camp are that he knows exactly what he needs to do. He knows how important it is for him to step up this season if he wants to continue to be the starter. And with a player that has that much self-awareness, I'm completely fine taking a shot at him, especially when I consider him highly undervalued. The final player on this list you had to know was coming. It's Calvin Ridley of the Atlanta Falcons, and this video is going on a bit longer than usual, so I'll try to make this one quick, especially since I know most of you guys already do agree with us on this one. But since this is a best player to draft video, the top 5, how could we make it without including Calvin Ridley? I think the only case for doubters, people not really buying into it, it's the entire narrative of why would I draft a wide receiver who is going to be the second option at best in their offense over somebody who's going to be the true number 1. I get that, and while I understand that argument is somewhat fair, it's really got to be more of an argument somebody makes who hasn't seen season after season these wide receiver tandems completely tear up the league, with 2 of them finishing inside the top 12. It actually happens quite often. In fact, 2019 we saw it with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. 2018 we had Juju, Antonio Brown, Diggs, Adam Thielen, Emmanuel Sanders, Demaryius Thomas, even all the way back to Randall Cobb, Jordy Nelson. We see these players produce top numbers and both be very highly startable on offenses that are really strong, especially in the passing game. That's really the one commonality between all of these tandems, and that's what we have here with the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons offense, it's a pass attempt factory. It has been the entire time it's been under Matt Ryan. He already ranks 12th all time in total pass attempts. He ranks 5th all time in passing yards per game, and heading into 2020, they have the most vacated targets in the entire league. Their defense, it has not improved whatsoever. They rank bottom 10 in points allowed per game in 2019. They have a chance to repeat that or even fall below that again for 2020. So there is a potential for garbage time production, and like I said, the most vacated targets in the entire league. Even more so than the overall vacated targets, they lost over 56% of their targets inside the 10-yard line. Julio Jones, he's not a strong pass catcher in that area. He has not been consistent throughout his career in converting those targets into touchdowns. Calvin Ridley, in his rookie season with just 5 starts, while he played in 16 games, he already has a double-digit touchdown season under his belt. Hayden Hurst was brought onto the team to take up some of those targets from Austin Hooper. A large majority of Austin Hooper's targets did come in the red zone last season, but Hayden Hurst is vastly unproven. We do like the potential upside for him, the opportunity, of course, but again, from what we've seen and who's established himself, that's Calvin Ridley. We're talking about a player from a fantasy points per game perspective who has habitually finished inside the top 20 each of his first 2 seasons, and considering that's around where he's being drafted and there is just so much other opportunity that presents itself for him this upcoming season, for us it's a no-brainer. He's a really strong value, and the only reason we're seeing him fall in drafts is because he's not technically the number 1 on his offense. Don't let that be the reason you don't draft him though. But guys, that's gonna do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you all for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.